Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of the Reset Show. Absolutely delighted that you could join us today. And we are so happy to be back after a little bit of a break over the summer, back slightly later than we'd originally planned because both B and I have had COVID, and we didn't catch up with each other. We haven't actually seen each other for weeks or months, but yeah, we both had COVID, so we had to delay the start. But we are back, and we are super excited to be joined by our special guest today, who I'll introduce you to in just one second. But before I do that, I just wanted to let you know we're going to be slightly changing the way we run the Reset Show from here on in. So we've decided to run it on a more ad hoc basis to give us more flexibility, really, in terms of guests. As you know, if you're listening, you can catch up anytime. It's not such an issue if you can't make it live, but obviously with guests having to kind of have a specific time that we ask guests to join us was meaning that some great guests we're missing out on. So we're going to carry on running it because we love doing it and we learn so much from our amazing guests. But what we're going to do is just make it a little bit more ad hoc. So watch this space. So let's get on to today's show then. Absolutely delighted to be joined by Erica Keswin today. And Erica, for those of you who don't know, is a best-selling author. Her first book, Bring Your Human to Work, I like the subtext here, 10 surefire ways to design a workplace that's good for people, great for business, and might just change the world. Absolutely love that. Completely fits with what we're all about here. So that was her first book. And the book we're going to predominantly be talking about today is her new book, The Rituals Roadmap, or Rituals Roadmap. So really excited to get into that. Erica is a sought after speaker. She's a workplace strategist. She works with kind of top of the class businesses, organizations. And I'm sure that she'll give you a little bit more background as to who she is as we get into the conversation today. So absolutely delighted to welcome Erica. And B, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, really, really excited to have Erica on the show today. Absolutely love the Rituals Roadmap. So it's a great read. And I know that Katie will share, if you're signed up to the Research Show, Katie will share details with everything we mentioned in today's show, so you can grab yourself a copy as well. Before we jump into our conversation, I just wanted to reflect really briefly on why this is interesting to me. Now, I joined a really fabulous agency called Nixon McInnes, based here in Brighton 10 years ago. It was so long ago. It was the time that social media was actually called new media, if you remember those days. And Nixon McInnes was really one of the first new media or social media agencies. Now, when I joined, I wouldn't have been able to label many of the weird, wacky, and impactful experiences I had there as rituals. But actually, that's exactly what they were. And just to give you a feel, some of these rituals have actually become quite famous over the years. So Nixon McInnes gave birth to something called the Church of Fail, which we did on a Friday afternoon with beer. Beer wasn't compulsory. And somebody or a few people would sort of stand up and start. We set up like a church in the columns, I guess, or the rows, if you like. And somebody or a few people would stand up and say what they really ballsed up that week or that month, what really went wrong for them that month. And everybody else would cheer and celebrate, and we'd talk about the learnings from that. So that was Church of Fail. And another one of the rituals that became really famous over the years was the happy buckets. So this is buckets by the door. You put your tennis balls in to say whether you'd had a good day, a bad day, or whether you had a bit of a meh kind of a day. So those were just a couple of the sort of rituals that were part of this agency at the time, Nixon McInnes. As I said, I wouldn't have been able to call them rituals at the time until we were joined by a new team member who specifically talked about creating rituals and these magical happenings at work. And when the agency closed sort of 5 years ago now, he even designed the most moving closing ritual for us, which was amazing. And I generally can say that my experience at Nixon McInnes has created some of the most long-lasting work friendships and memories of work as well. And I'm personally really curious to explore what it is about rituals that has created those memories and those lasting friendships for me. So hopefully that's all something that we'll tap into. Obviously, the world has gone virtual for a lot of people, not everybody, in the last 18 months or so. So I was really interested in, Erica, your book, particularly about how rituals can translate from the physical workspace to the virtual workspace and their role in creating, sustaining, cementing culture. Again, hopefully all topics that we're going to explore. Before we jump into the questions, Erica, is there anything that Emma didn't say about you in her introduction that you think we really should know?
Let's see. No, I think we'll weave it into the conversation. So all good.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Let's go way back to the basics, shall we? How do you define rituals in the workplace?
Right. So when I started studying the science of rituals, the way that it came about is after I wrote Bring Your Human to Work, I interviewed many senior leaders in HR, culture, line managers, all different kinds of people about how they were creating a more human workplace. And one day I had this aha moment, and I saw that while they weren't calling them rituals at the time, as you were saying, when I looked across all these examples, many of them were using these rituals. It was one of their tools in their tool belt to make their employees, the people that worked for them on their teams, their colleagues, even their clients sometimes feel more connected. And sort of that was this might be something interesting to sort of take a deep dive on to learn more about the science of rituals. So what is a ritual, and why are we even talking about them at work, since many people think about rituals more in your personal life? My definition of rituals has three parts. The first is a ritual is something to which we assign a certain amount of meaning and intention. Number two is that typically for rituals, there's a regular cadence. It could be something we do every morning. I have a personal ritual. I go get my Starbucks and feel the heat on my hands, take a few deep breaths before I start my day. It could be something you do once a week, once a year, but there is a regular cadence. The third part was something I hadn't really considered until I started studying rituals, which is that a ritual is something that goes beyond its practical purpose. So I'm sitting here in my home office in New York City. If my lights were to go out and I light a candle so I can see what I'm writing, that's not a ritual. But if I light a candle at 6 o'clock every day to signify, the end of the workday and the beginning of my time at home, which for the record is even more important with all of us working at home these days, that's a ritual. I'm not lighting that candle for any practical purpose other than to have this meaning to help me with this transition. And so just to link it back to the couple of rituals that you talked about, throwing a tennis ball in the bucket, there's no practical purpose per se, but how do you know it's a ritual? People would really miss it when it's gone. And my guess is, as you were talking, if there was a week on a Friday where that didn't happen, something would feel off. There would be something that felt like it was missing.
I love that. And you've already touched on why rituals are important in terms of connection. And I think right now that is so massively important. But why else? Is it all about connection, or are rituals important for other reasons as well?
So I don't know if you all face this as well, but being in the people space, the human capital space, I often will get the, it's the soft stuff, and they may not say it directly to my face, but I know that's what many of them are thinking, and I'm used to it. But so in my work, both in Bring Your Human to Work and the Rituals book, I strive to share not only the stories of rituals, but the science and what is the ROI? Why are we doing it? So the good news is there is an ROI, not just for us personally, but also for our teams. And I took all the science and tried to boil it down and created an equation that I call the 3 Ps of rituals. This is what rituals give us. So the first P is psychological safety. Rituals give us a sense of belonging and psychological safety, which is really important, not only today, but always at work. Number 2, rituals give us an opportunity to connect to purpose. And there's a lot of data that shows the correlation between employee engagement and retention and a connection to purpose. And you add those two together and you get increased performance. So two examples on that. Number 1, when we feel more connected to the people that we work with on our teams, and I'm sure, again, as you were giving your examples, Belinda, in the beginning, everybody's up talking about, how they failed that week, and having these rituals, your oxytocin, that feel-good hormone, goes up, and your cortisol, your stress, goes down. And so from a truly a physiological health and wellness perspective, rituals can have an impact on your own personal bottom line. From a work perspective, in the book, there are many studies. The one that I love talked about how when you feel a great sense of psychological safety and connection, and like you can be yourself on your team or at work, collaboration goes up by 47% and productivity can go up by as much as 50%. So the numbers are real, and it does make sense when you think about it, because if you know, I'm looking at 6-7 of us on this screen, you know, if I feel like I can be me, you know, right before we started recording, you know, I turned my computer on, I ran out, I was getting my son out the door, you know, making sure he took his smoothie because he hates to eat breakfast, and his big soccer game today. You know, if I'm hiding sort of who I am, I'm holding back, and, you know, we just can't work together, you know, as effectively versus me being comfortable just sharing who I am both inside and outside the office.
I'm going to come to Emma and offer Emma the chance to jump in. I'm a little bit earlier than usual, but I just know that there's going to be so much going on for you right now.
Put me on the spot, B. Yeah, I absolutely all really resonating, Erica, and something we've talked about for years is this idea of bringing your real self to work. I mean, you know, one of the things that really comes out of your books, I haven't read the new one yet, but I've read the previous one, which I love, you know, is this human piece. And I always wonder, so I'm rambling slightly now, but I'm kind of observing this we kind of forget to be humans when we cross the threshold of work often. And it's sort of like the stuff that, even the language we speak in, right? There's some words we use, like moving forwards. You'd never say that in your outside of work, would you? You'd never talk about let's moving forwards, you know, and we've kind of forget how to be humans. And I think that I really hope that one of the kind of silver linings of COVID is it's enabled us to be more human and be our real selves. And, you know, all the memes of people with kids behind them and all that sort of stuff, and we've all seen that. And, you know, we've all had that experience, and I've had that experience myself and shared it many times, and saying before COVID I'd been mortified that my 12-year-old stood behind me giving me a cuddle. Actually, he's 13 today. And suddenly it's okay to do that. And I always struggled wearing a suit. I'm not a suit sort of person. I mean, you know, look at me. I look like I borrowed my mum's suit when I wear a suit. It's obviously not me. And I really hope that we're moving to a place now where we can be more authentic at work and be our real selves and say the things that we probably wouldn't have said before because we worried how we might be judged about, whether it's tattoos or piercings or crazy hair or whatever it might be. And I just wondered if you've got some views on that. If you've seen that with clients you're dealing with, there's more acceptance for people to be who they really are rather than having to conform to a corporate stereotype.
Yeah. So a couple of things on that. Number one, I mean, I agree with you. We see it all the time now. I think my goal and my collective goal for humanity is to remember that, even though I think we often have short-term memories, that when we do go back to the office, I think it will look different, and we won't always be on Zoom, but I hope we don't forget what we saw and the impact that has. So that's my goal to keep reminding people. But I will say that the leaders who have done this, who have walked the walk, and not only just, let, the crazy storm go on behind them, but have actually taken it a step further and shared and been, I feel like it's a little overused, the word vulnerable right now, but truly have said, I may be the boss, but here's what's going on in my life. Many of them, and this is not a statistically significant, sample size, but there are many of the leaders that I've been talking to and interviewing on my podcast and just following up from the book, their employee engagement has been higher during the pandemic because of their communications. I mean, I wouldn't even call it a strategy. It just sort of came about that they communicated much more often. They used a variety of different mediums. They told very personal, true stories. And, one leader really stands out in this category is Bill Koenigsberg, is the CEO of a company called Horizon Media. It's about 3,000 people. And he started a new ritual called the Bill Daily, where he would send out an email to everybody. At the beginning, it was like, let's make sure everybody's safe and dealing with keeping the business afloat. And once they got that under control, it morphed into him sharing advice, him talking about, real things going on. And he said the number of emails that he's gotten about what it's meant, people shared it with their parents. The parents were emailing him. And at the end of the day, it was not rocket science. It was about him being human.
Yes. So interesting, isn't it? I think in the book, you use language to talk about rituals tying employees to companies, particularly during the pandemic. What is it? What's the tying? What's going on there? What is it about rituals that's creating that space for connection and authenticity, whatever it is? What is it about rituals that do that? I mean, tying is such a strong visual image. What's going on?
So, part of it is, it goes back to that science, that when you have a ritual and people do feel that sense of, I feel like I've used the word so much, but it really, the sense of psychological safety and connection and belonging, where you have a ritual in a meeting, let's say, and instead of just diving right in, everybody goes around and sort of shares something. Or a colleague of mine at Microsoft joined a new team during the pandemic, and a lot of people were new, and started a new ritual where one person a week shares their origin story. And you always get a few eye rolls in the beginning. Oh, am I really gonna have to do this? And they did it. And because people didn't really know each other, the stories were amazing. And the way that people would say, oh, I didn't know you were from there. I have a cousin, like all these connections were made. And by the end, after the whole team went around, I feel like the person who was the most skeptical, said to her, well, what's the next question going to be? And so you can't always, the thing about rituals is that it's more of a pull and not a push. So you can't say, okay, like somebody listening to this podcast can't say, okay, well, that's going to be our new ritual. We're going to do this origin story. It worked for this company. And it's much more around, and this is a question I ask in the book, and would love for people listening to think about it, and everybody that I can see on the screen, you can think about it in your own lives and in your own, in your offices, to say, and the way that I would phrase the question, for example, like the head of human resources at Chipotle or LinkedIn or a law firm, when do employees at Chipotle feel most Chipotle-ish? When do they, very technical, when do they feel most connected? And when I asked that, the head of HR's answer was, they feel most Chipotle-ish every day at 10:15 before they open for lunch, which who knew Chipotle actually opens at 10:30 in the morning. But they do, if anybody wants a burrito that early. And everybody, they've been there since 6:30 in the morning, chopping up the lettuce and making the guacamole, and they all sit down for a meal together. And I got to experience that. So regardless of what that ritual is, when it's truly a ritual, there's this pull, which not only makes it ties people together, but that really is where the magic happens.
And I mean, you mentioned Chipotle and LinkedIn, and there's some other great examples of organizations and stories of rituals in the book. I mean, so many of them. This is a bit of a binary question, so feel free to expand on it. But what's interesting is that almost like the rituals rock stars that you mention in the book are those companies that time and again show up in those lists of cool companies to work for, great organizational culture. So there is this really strong link between rituals and company culture or corporate culture.
Yes. I mean, yeah, 100%.
I'll ask a flip question to that. Is it possible to have a great corporate culture that doesn't contain rituals of some sort?
I am sure it does. But my guess is, like, again, people might not call it rituals, and they might be doing it with somewhat unconsciously. But my guess is I'll let you know if I find one, but my guess is if I were to have a conversation with them and peel back the layers, they are doing ritual-like things. And the way that the book is structured is that I looked at rituals around and across the employee experience. So rituals starting at the beginning, rituals around recruiting, rituals around onboarding, when you have meetings, beginning projects, eating together online or in person, professional development, celebrating milestones. So my guess would be that they're doing certain things to make people feel more connected to each other. And it could be service. They give back every year. And when you ask that question, when do you feel most, connected, it's probably during those things that tend to happen at a regular cadence. That would be my gut answer to that question.
Yes. Yeah, I was really, as Emma mentioned before we started chatting, we co-authored a book this year on employee experience design, which was, a brilliant experience. So I was really interested to see that you'd broken your book down into those kind of like life cycle stages, if you like, of the employee experience. And there, I guess, also rituals, corporate rituals that sort of sit almost at an umbrella level or outside of those life cycle stages. How do those two interact, or how do you dissect the difference between those, or does it not matter? They're just all rituals.
Yeah, I don't, it goes back to, when do you feel most connected? So it's interesting. I think in some organizations there are rituals, and when they start to read the book or we have a conversation, they realize, oh, you know what, that is a ritual, and almost elevate it to sort of ritual status and talk about it like a ritual, and sort of lean into, this is something we do. We've never called it that. Let's actually, formalize may not be the right word, but let's call it what it is. And I think that almost elevates it even more to say, this is important to our culture, and let's acknowledge that. So I don't think it has to be around a particular life cycle, and sometimes they're very team specific. Some are organization wide and some are team specific. I talk about a manager at LinkedIn who, before the pandemic, every day at 3:00, one person would play one song and they would have this dance party. And the one person I interviewed said, I always wondered every day, was it going to happen? Because they never really talked about it, but it was just something their team did. And instead of the, back in the day, the smoke break or the coffee break, that was their, stretch, at 3 or 4 o'clock. And yeah, it was part of their own team life cycle.
Fabulous. And in the book, in terms of the very practical step of building a roadmap, the roadmap bit of the book, you talk about the first step being to stop and look and see what rituals you already have. And I guess my question is, have you ever worked in an organization where there simply are none? Or how do you, as you say, also, people might think there are, but if you peel back the layers and take care, how do you do that peeling back of layers to find those rituals that do need to be taken care of and amplified a little?
So, and I think it's an important question, because with the pandemic and the hybrid revolution, and figuring out this new world of work, our rituals have been upended. So whether you had none or all of a sudden you need to think about new ones, it's an important question to say, where do I start? So one of the reasons why I called the book Rituals Roadmap was about, how do we design a roadmap for our team, for our organization, or for us personally? And the place where I like to start is trying to link rituals to your organization's values. Emma said she read Bring Your Human to Work, and as she knows, and others who have read it, I'm somewhat obsessed with company values and bringing the values to life. Cheesy as it sounds, how do we get the values off the walls and into the halls? And building rituals around those values is such an amazing opportunity to create that stickiness. So I worked with a company literally last week, and it's a 15-person company, and they decided here in New York, financial services industry, that they are fully getting rid of their office. No more office. And instead, they're all going remote, but they are going to come together one day a month to connect and bring their whole team together. And so they brought me in to talk to them about rituals and to really think about and design, what would that day look like? Because if you're only coming together one day, you want to do a mix of work and team building and connecting, because you kind of have to make up for the other 29 days in the month. So I broke everybody up into groups based on what they were saying was important: professional development, team building, and then getting, having some, doing some in-person meetings that they would do remote. I didn't call that bucket work, because I truly believe that the other pieces are just as important from a work perspective. And so I broke them up and I asked that magical question, when do you feel most connected? And the answer was so fascinating, not only for me, but for the CEO. So all the groups ended up talking about this Friday morning meeting that they had. And I had no idea, what they were talking about, but each group. So I wrote down, Friday morning meeting ? And we came back together as a group and we were trying to map out what the day would look like. And I talked about, beginnings and endings are what I call prime rituals real estate. Like, let's think about what makes us feel most connected to our organization. And let's talk about how we begin a day or a week and how we end. Like, it's always a great place to start to bring people, especially in this example where people are only coming together once a month. So I said, so my question is, you all talked about this Friday morning meeting. What is it? And one of the senior leaders was sort of chuckling, and he said, this was something that we started during the pandemic to stay connected. And it's the one meeting on their schedule per week where the only rule was that there was no official work that was going to be done. So it was, back to that comment I made about the touchy-feely and the bond, that kind of stuff. They didn't realize it, but that was on its way to becoming a ritual and something that made them feel connected. And I think everybody was sort of surprised, but it was so consistent. And so I was able to help draw that out, link it back to their values and their strategic goals about this new hybrid situation, and really make sure that it kept going every Friday when they weren't together and kind of elevating the status, but also doing it when they come together once a month, because it is that much better in person.
I love it. I love that. Thank you for showing practical examples, because I think with talking about rituals, it's so easy for it to sort of disappear somewhere into the ether. And so actually having these really practical examples hopefully is helping people to connect to what actually are ritual or ritual potential in their organizations.
Can I just jump in there a sec,
Great.
I was just going to build on that a sec. Something you mentioned a few minutes ago, Erica, was rituals need to be pull, not push. I think that really resonated with me, because I guess I'm interested in this idea of kind of the formal versus the informal. I was just reflecting on my own experience when I worked in-house, and when I felt really connected to the organisation, it was probably the more informal that made me feel really connected. And I know sometimes when there's a kind of a formal ritual that's sort of pushed onto you with the best of intentions, you can feel, especially us being British, right? Even when you were talking about the Church of Failby, I was like, oh God, I'd have hated that. I would have got into it and played along, but after I would have gone, that was, I'm sure I wouldn't. But the buckets, I'd have been fine with the buckets. But how do you manage all of that so that those people that are a bit cynical, sometimes they could be a little bit forced, and how do you avoid that? And how do you make them feel natural and real and authentic, so they really are, you are benefiting from all the wonderful, elements you've talked about of having really powerful rituals? Does that make sense? Have you come across that?
No, 100%. I would say a couple of things. Rituals can come from anywhere, top down, bottom up, inside out. And I urge people not to, you've got to take your ego out of it. So if somebody's listening to this and says, oh, we're going to do, this origin story ritual, or we're going to, in the book, I talk about the company Allbirds that has a ritual called 40 at 4, where they do push-ups at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, or watch the other people doing the push-ups. That may not work for your culture. And so I think it's a great way to, talk to people about, sharing the science behind it, but then saying, what ideas do you have? And trying to get that buy-in, saying, it is important, especially in this hybrid world, let's get advice. I also think if somebody listens and says, okay, we're all going to try this and it's not working, you need to move on, that it can't really be a push. A caveat to that goes back to that example from Microsoft, where if at some point with some people, you almost need to pull them aside and say, look, this may not totally fit with you, but when the feedback we're getting and the connection of the team, you kind of might have to suck it up. And so it is a balance. I would say that when something really becomes sticky, like that example that I gave, ultimately over time, even the skeptical people see, they tend to see the value in it organically, and what happens. And if it doesn't, it's time to sort of call it and think about something else. And again, you got to take your ego out of it, because not everything is going to work for every company or every team.
Yeah, I love that. And I think one of the things that really resonated when you've mentioned a couple of times the food thing, and I think that translates across every culture and every organisation, right? And it can be formal or informal. I know in the UK, you know, going to the pub on a Friday lunchtime for so many people, and it's certainly been a big part of my ritual when I was in house with one organisation. You know, that's what everybody did, and it was. And like you said about Nixon McInnes, you know, I've still got some wonderful friends in that period of my life, and no small part of that is because we all go to the pub. And there was also a breakfast. I can't remember what day it was. There was one morning we'd all go for breakfast together. So I think the food thing really resonated with me, because I'm like, that doesn't feel forced. It's something we all have to eat, and it feels like a quite an easy way to start to establish a ritual.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, and I'll just add to that, because, you know, in both books I reference, you know, the food thing is important. And I love that because it's linked to a well-known study out of Cornell, where a professor named Kevin Niffen was studying team performance and what makes one team higher performing than another. And he studied firehouses and firefighters when he was getting his PhD. His dad was a firefighter, so that's how he grew up, hanging out in the firehouse. And the short version of what he found is that the firefighters who were the most dedicated to the ritual of the firehouse meal, sitting around the table, breaking bread, shooting the breeze, kind of just being themselves, it actually correlated with higher performance, and those firefighters saved more lives. So you're out for breakfast, you're out at the pub, and you just are much more likely to be open to, you know, not because maybe you're drinking beer, but even in the morning at breakfast, you know, just about being yourself. And, you know, if you and I are having breakfast and, you know, we just got into a conversation and you shared like what an awful morning you had, like trying to get your kid out the door. And 2 hours later, you know, we have a like really stressful client situation, and you're not all there. I sort of have a sense that you have some things going on, and I can step up and say, you know, don't worry, Emma, you know, I got this. I know what you're dealing with. So there is this correlation with bringing your whole self and really knowing each other and the work. And I think rituals can help facilitate that by bringing you together in a way where you're more likely to connect as people.
Brilliant, love that. Thank you. Thanks for that. I'll hand back to you now, B. I interrupted.
Yeah, I was going to ask Katie. I think there was a question or two in the chat.
Yeah, a couple of questions. The first one says, can we pop in the study that was referenced where it's 47% increase in collaboration, 50% in productivity? So first of all, we will send out that link to that study to our subscribers. So we'll catch up with Erica and just get details of that so we can make sure that is sent out to everyone who's subscribed. And the second question here is, one of the things my company is grappling with is the continuation of the rituals we've established once everyone has returned to the office. What advice or tips do you have? And that's from Donna.
I just put my email in the chat if anybody wants some of this information as well. So how can we continue the rituals? You know, I guess I'm not sure, or maybe you can put into the chat, Donna, you know, sort of your own personal, because some people are worried about how do I maintain my own personal rituals that I've made at home. And there's some anxiety around the loss of those rituals because now we're going to be going to the office. So that's a piece of it. You know, from a company rituals perspective, you know, what I recommend doing is having this conversation and saying, if we were to look across and around the employee experience from all the things that we began to do over the last 18 months, first acknowledge this is what our team's been doing, you know, whether we've been doing it formally or informally, kind of like that Friday morning meeting I just referenced, it just evolved. So it's kind of noticing how have we been working together and having a conversation with people, you know, which rituals do we want to try to keep? How would we build them in to, you know, coming back into the office? Because it depends on your schedule. You might be in 3 days a week. You know, you might decide one day everybody stays home and you're all back on Zoom. So I think I would look across the employee experience and identify what those touch points are first. Number two, you know, don't try to do all of them because that might be overwhelming. Think of the ones, ask your team that question. When do we feel most like us? You know, when would it feel totally weird at this point if this one particular crazy, 7th inning stretch at a baseball game, primal scream because we're so frustrated, lighting a candle, whatever you've been doing, which ones would seem that would really, really be missed, I think is a great place to start. And the ones that are most aligned with your values, and get input from the team, pick a couple, see how it goes, and then go back and have those conversations around it. But linking it to the values and getting that input, I think could be really important as you transition back to the office, because there's going to be a lot of stress and anxiety around, because it's changing our schedule and our cadence and our timing. So people might be less open to some of them because some of the other stresses around commuting and all these things are now back.
So keeping those channels of conversation open, and this is such rich territory, isn't it, for noticing and dialogue and conversation, and using it as a framework to think about what comes next if we come back to the office, when we come back to the office, part in the office, part not. So those dialogues, and I love that question, when do we feel most like us? It's such an appreciative inquiry type of question, isn't it, about when it's good, what is good about it and how can we maintain that? So such a powerful question. We've got more questions popping up as well, some on the subject of food and the importance of food, which is, we've talked about the kind of like the free breakfast before, and we've talked about the cost of that, which isn't the point I'm trying to make. It's easy to focus on the cost rather than the community that you're connecting when you bring people together. I know years ago, I was talking to a consultancy, and the CEO of this consultancy was a big believer in slow food, and they shut the office down for 2 hours every day to cook and to eat every day together. That's a huge commitment. That's not going to work in every context, but 2 hours a day, cooking, sitting down, eating, sharing bread together was so important to them. And another comment from Donna. Katie, do you want to share the last one with us? What's going on there? Or anything else I've missed in the chat that we need to bring up?
Yeah, no, Donna's just replied to the last question, just to say yes, from a company perspective. The benefit of doing these things to increase connection in a virtual world seems clear now, but do we still need them when we're back to the office 100%, as my company will be? It's almost like execs believe the value is due to being remote and not this deeper connection that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I truly believe, and that, the companies that I interviewed in the book were doing these rituals when they were in person. And I handed in the manuscript for the book at the end of March in 2020 and thinking, oh my Lord, like what's gonna happen here with this book? The upside was that I actually had time to circle back with leaders. So there's a whole chapter at the end of the book about how they adapted those rituals, but they all started when they were in the office. And so a lot of the examples and the rationale and that feeling of connectedness really didn't have anything to do with being remote. And so what I worry about, and there's a lot of studies also in Bring Your Human to Work, is that when we're all back in the office, we run the risk of going back to what we were often doing before, which was being alone together, that we were all in the office and not talking to each other. Now, all I want to do right now is to be in an office and actually see people and go down the hall and have that feeling of normalcy. But again, we all know how soon we forget, and we're all and I worry, Donna, it's so interesting that you raise this, because it's making me think, I worry even more that because we got used to being at home and having more time to work out and, be with the kids during the day, all these different things that we were able to do, I worry that when we go back to the office, we're going to have, some people will have even less tolerance for some of this, because all they want to do is get back home and are not going to necessarily be willing and see the benefit of it. So you're really making me think sort of real time, my brain's sort of spinning. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to think a lot about this, but I push back on like there's so many studies in the book. I mean, there's too many to even rattle off, but it's going to be, we all are talking about the Great Resignation, and there's a huge war for talent. And I worry, and you can say this to your leaders, that companies that don't focus on this, it's not all day. You can have rituals that take literally 3 minutes. they can cost nothing and they don't take a lot of time. But if you're not feeling connected, and we know this, you don't feel connected just by virtue of being in the same physical space. You can almost feel worse. That if all of a sudden you have these high expectations and being back in the office and no one is talking to you and you're passing each other in the hall just to get your stuff done to get home, people are going to quit. And I actually am doing an event tomorrow at a law firm with it's for one of their women's groups, about 100 people. And, they're starting to be back in the office. They're feeling very disconnected. And one of their sort of rising stars just quit. And so if people come back to the office and don't feel connected, and someone taps them and says, I'm going to pay you a little bit more, it's like, might as well leave. Don't feel that connected anyway. So I think there's an even bigger risk to not do any of this when you come back, because their leaders might be thinking, well, we're just going to get this feeling of connection via osmosis, and we're not. So I love that. And I may write an article on it. So email me and I'll put you in there.
Great
we
question.
can do it anonymous if you want, but it's a really good point. It's important.
Really the great resignation piece is really interesting, isn't it? And I kind of like both hate and love the terms. I hate when we give something a label, it kind of makes it a thing. But I think from the work that we do, it's such a brilliant opportunity we've always talked about, the retention piece as being a key driver for the work we do, in terms of, if you don't get this right with your people, you're going to lose them. But it seems that like there's a real kind of power shift, certainly in the UK, that employees just feel loads more like, I'm mad as hell, I'm not going to put up with this anymore. Like, hooray. And finally, people are laughing here at the banks who are saying, yeah, if you come back to the office though, we'll give you a barbecue on the terrace. And people go, forget it, you didn't even know me, and they're really sort of, they're taking action. They're saying, I don't care, you're going to pay me more. I've got this different life now and I want to keep hold of it. So I think that's really exciting. I think that's the positive part of it, that finally we can kind of say to organizations, like, get this stuff right. So the rituals and all the other stuff that all the elements that we work in with organizations, get it right with your people, and everything else will fall into place. And finally, I think we've got a real mandate to do that, hope anyway. So I think that's a really brilliant point. So thank you. Thanks for raising that. Sorry, B, back over to you.
No, just an eye on the time. I've got a last question for you, Erica, which is, you've already touched on a personal ritual with your coffee. Yeah, your coffee in the morning and sitting there in the warmth. Now, obviously, you're a woman that has done a phenomenal amount, 2 best-selling books. You work with some phenomenal clients. You've got some great ideas, which we're just touching the surface of today. And I know that you're a mum as well. So what other personal rituals are really important to you?
So, my coffee ritual is not to be missed. Not just for it's really not about the caffeine. I share a story in the book about how one day I would go and I get my same drink every day, and I drank it and had this moment where I realized I hadn't tasted it, and, felt very productive, got through my whole to-do list, but I was so bummed because I really enjoy it that I hadn't tasted it, and had this shift, which is where this was a number of years ago, where this coffee routine, and I wasn't calling it all of this at the time because it was probably 6 years ago, became a ritual where I realized it's about being intentional, that I would go to get it every day, but was sort of drinking it blindly, not tasting it, bummed me out, because I really think about that first cup of coffee before I go to bed. And it's just really something I enjoy. During the pandemic, I also started doing, one of the things I realized was that I missed, I was with my family. So I would used to say, oh, we need more family dinners. We had family dinners coming out of our ears, which was great. But I missed like my friends, my girlfriends, and I couldn't see anybody. We were quarantining outside the city. And so I started a new ritual where I would go for a walk twice a week with a friend in Colorado, and good old fashioned phone, no video. And we would just go for a walk and connect. And it was actually, I got 2 for 1, because I got my steps in and I connected with this friend, and, we continue to do it. And it was something like, I asked the question, what makes you feel most connected to your company? I would also tell people to ask the question for themselves, what do you do in your life that makes you feel most like you, or your family feel most like your family? You know, we have Taco Tuesday. You know, I just dropped off 2 of my kids at college, so now there's only 1 kid I'm feeding tacos to. But Taco Tuesday, I have my Pilates class at 8 a.m., which during the pandemic, I could have done it at any time during the day, but I kept it at 8 because there was that sense of that cadence and that sense of connection. So start with what makes you feel like you.
Thank you. And I know from my experience as well, the fitness class that I used to do face-to-face, and then it went online, and they were all on YouTube, but I would always do the live online version of the class, not the YouTube ones. It was a sense of connection. It was that sense of other people doing it. And that was the time that I did it. And it became massively important to me. So it's interesting. Yeah, these things that take on it's the intentionality and the noticing around it, isn't it? So you can drink a cup of coffee and not notice it, but as soon as it's a ritual and you give it that space and you think about it, it becomes more meaningful and has a bigger impact. I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation we've had today. Thank you so much for joining us. Thoroughly recommend the book to anybody who's listening or watching after today. So I will just sign off from my end, and I'll hand over to Emma. But from me, Erica, thank you so much for joining. Thoroughly enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much.
Thanks, B. And yeah, likewise, huge thank you, Erica. Absolutely fascinating. We could talk for hours on this. You've certainly kind of got me thinking about this topic, and yeah, just really interested to find out from other people what their personal rituals are. I'd love to hear more about that. So massive thank you for giving us your time. Really appreciate it. Okay, talking about rituals, next show. So the next show, we've got a really fascinating session, which is on how to unearth purpose and measure the impact. So it's kind of a practitioner research show with Thomas Nudge. Should I say that right, B?
Nudge.
Nudge. I knew I'd get it wrong. Thomas Nudge. Apologies, Thomas, if you're listening. Who is from Crownwide Group, and he's been joined by a previous guest of ours, Sam Knowles from Insight Agents, and along with our very own B. They worked on a fantastic piece of work on purpose and impact of purpose, and it was so good. It won an International Internal Comms Engagement Award for the groundbreaking work. And yeah, so really looking at some real life practice, which is always really, really interesting and useful. So make sure you join us for that research show. Hope you can join us then. And thank you as always for listening, and we'll look forward to catching up with you soon. So take care and goodbye.